Learn English through story. The Poor Girl's Dream. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the grand dining hall. A silver tray slipped from trembling hands and crashed onto the marble floor, sending crystal glasses in every direction. The room fell silent. At the center of the disaster stood 18-year-old Eleanor Hart, her face pale with fear. The wealthy guests stared at her with annoyance while candlelight flickered across the enormous chandeliers above. Lady Ashford slowly lowered her teacup. "You foolish girl," she said coldly. "Do you have any idea how expensive those glasses were?" Eleanor immediately knelt on the floor. "I'm terribly sorry, my lady." Her fingers shook as she gathered the broken pieces. One sharp edge cut into her skin, but she did not dare complain. A servant who complained never remained employed for long, especially not in Ashford Manor. Long before she entered the grand mansion, Eleanor had lived in a tiny village in Yorkshire with her widowed mother and younger brother. Their cottage roof leaked during rainstorms, and winter winds slipped through cracks in the walls like invisible ghosts. After her mother became ill, Eleanor left school at 16 to earn money. At first, she worked in a textile factory where the hours were cruel and the pay miserable. But when the factory closed unexpectedly, she searched desperately for employment. That was how she arrived at Ashford Manor. The mansion stood upon a hill overlooking the countryside, like a palace from another world. Tall iron gates guarded the property, while servants hurried constantly through endless hallways. Eleanor had never seen such luxury before. The carpets were softer than blankets. The mirrors were framed in gold. Fresh flowers filled every room. Yet despite its beauty, Ashford Manor felt strangely cold. Servants were expected to remain silent, invisible, and obedient. "Remember your place," the head housekeeper, Mrs. Whittaker, often warned. "The family upstairs lived differently from people like us." Eleanor nodded politely each time, but secretly she hated those words. People like us. Every evening after finishing her duties, Eleanor passed a large wooden door on the second floor. Behind that door lay the manor library. Sometimes it remained slightly open, and she caught glimpses of towering shelves filled with books from floor to ceiling. History books, poetry, novels, travel journals. Eleanor loved books more than anything. As a child, she borrowed old novels from the village church and read them beside candlelight late into the night. But servants at Ashford Manor were forbidden from entering the library. "Books are not meant for maids," one footman once joked cruelly. Still, Eleanor often paused outside the door for just a moment before returning downstairs. One stormy night, while dusting the corridor nearby, she noticed the library door standing wide open. No one appeared to be inside. Her heart beat rapidly. She glanced left, then right. Slowly, she stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and old paper. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows while fire crackled inside the enormous fireplace. Eleanor walked carefully between the shelves as though entering a sacred place. Her fingers brushed gently across book spines. Then she saw it, a beautiful dark blue novel resting upon a small table near the window. Great Expectations. Carefully, she opened the first page. "You should not be in here." The deep voice behind her nearly stopped her heart. Eleanor turned quickly. A tall young man stood beside the doorway wearing a dark suit. His sharp gray eyes studied her with curiosity rather than anger. I apologize, sir," Eleanor stammered. "I was only cleaning." The man glanced at the untouched dustcloth in her hand. "Cleaning literature?" Her cheeks burned red. "I love books," she admitted quietly. To her surprise, the young man smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." The young man was Edward Ashford, the only son of Lord and Lady Ashford. Unlike the rest of the family, Edward rarely treated servants cruelly. He spent most of his time reading or traveling through London for business matters. After that evening in the library, he often found excuses to speak with Eleanor. Sometimes he asked her opinion about books. Sometimes he simply watched her curiosity with amusement. "You read remarkably well," Edward remarked one evening. "My mother taught me," Eleanor replied softly. "And why are you working as a maid instead of attending university?" Eleanor laughed sadly. "Girls like me do not attend universities, Mr. Ashford." "Perhaps society's wrong." She looked at him carefully. Rich people often spoke kindly for amusement, never truly understanding. Yet Edward's voice carried sincerity. One evening he handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a second-hand copy of Jane Eyre. Eleanor stared at it in disbelief. "No one has ever bought me a book before," she whispered. Edward smiled gently. "Then the world has been terribly unfair to you." Winter arrived, and Ashford Manor prepared for its annual Christmas ball. Servants worked endlessly polishing silver, preparing food, and decorating the enormous ballroom. Eleanor spent hours hanging golden ribbons while music echoed through the halls during rehearsals. That night, wealthy guests arrived wearing diamonds and velvet gowns. Eleanor watched quietly from the staircase shadows. For a moment, she imagined herself among them, laughing, dancing, belonging. But Mrs. Whittaker's sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "Stop staring and continue working." Eleanor lowered her eyes immediately. Later that evening, while carrying fresh champagne into the ballroom, Eleanor overheard two women whispering nearby. "That maid has become rather friendly with Mr. Ashford. How disgraceful. She should remember her position." Their laughter pierced Eleanor more painfully than she expected. Suddenly, she felt ashamed for dreaming beyond her station, ashamed for believing books and kindness could change anything. Several days later, Eleanor sat alone in the servant quarters, reading beside candlelight. Edward entered quietly. "You disappeared from the library," he said. "I became busy." "That is not the truth." Eleanor closed the book slowly. "You were born into a world where opportunities wait behind every door," she said softly. "People like me spend our lives cleaning those doors for others." Edward remained silent. Then he asked carefully, "What do you truly want, Eleanor?" She stared into the candle flame for a long moment. Finally, she whispered, "I want to become a teacher." The words sounded impossible, spoken aloud. "A teacher?" Edward smiled warmly. "You would be excellent. But dreams do not feed hungry families." "No," Edward replied quietly, "but they give people reasons to survive difficult lives." Hidden in a drawer. Weeks later, Edward discovered something while searching for documents in the library desk. An unfinished application letter. It belonged to Eleanor. The letter requested admission to a teacher training college in London. Edward realized she had never sent it. That evening, he found her polishing silver in the dining hall. "Why did you not post the application?" Eleanor froze. "How did you—" "You deserve an answer." Tears filled her eyes. "The fee costs more than 6 months of my wages." Edward looked at her silently. Then he said something Eleanor would remember forever. Poverty should never decide whether a person deserves education. 3 months later, Eleanor stood outside a small teacher training college in London. In her hands rested an acceptance letter and a scholarship document. She could hardly believe they were real. Edward had secretly spoken to an educational charity that supported intelligent working girls. Eleanor turned towards him with tears in her eyes. "You changed my life." "No," Edward replied kindly. "You changed your own life the moment you refused to stop dreaming." The morning sun warmed the streets as London awakened around them. For the first time, Eleanor no longer felt invisible. Epilogue and the classroom. Years later, children filled a bright classroom with laughter while Miss Eleanor Hart wrote poetry lines upon a blackboard. She was no longer a frightened maid carrying silver trays through endless hallways. She was a teacher, a woman who once cleaned the floors of a mansion but refused to let poverty bury her dreams. One afternoon, a little girl approached her timidly. "Miss Hart," she whispered, "do you think poor girls can become important people?" Eleanor smiled softly. Then she remembered Ashford Manor, the hidden library, and the dreams she once believed impossible. "Yes," she answered gently. "Sometimes poor girls become the strongest people